Begin the current Daf Mesechta Sotah Daf Mem Aleph. Begin on the second line down the top of the Amud, where the Gemara finishes up the conversation from the previous Daf, which all these Mishnayos are going through one by one. The title of this parak, we said Elam Namarim. These are the things that are said by Chaloshan or B'Lashon HaKodesh. The previous Mishnah spoke about Birchas Kohen Gadol Keitzad, because we're speaking about that it has to be said in Lashon HaKodesh. And one of the things we said, so these are the brachas that he said on Yom Kippurim, and then also spoke about what he laned. On that, our Mishnah, our Gemara continues regarding what he laned from Parashat Achrimais and Achbasa, and how he went with the Sefer Torah, because he actually read from three different parashas. Two of them he read from one Sefer Torah, and the other one he read by heart. And the Gemara discusses why that was the case. Shis corresponds to Bakasach and Cheskel, turn to Daf Chaim. Appreciate everyone who's joining for today's Daf. So, discussing today's Daf are the theme of the next Mishnah, Parashas HaMelech, which is also another one of those things that we said B'Lashon HaKodesh regarding by the Hakel year. In Yeshiva Dora El Beis David Bavad, no one's allowed to sit in the courtyard but the kings of the Davidic dynasty. Melech Shemachal Al Kavod Ein Kavod Machal. Even if a kid it pardons his honor, it's not considered pardon. The incident of the king of Grifas, in which the Yidden were punished because they were chaynif l'Rasha, they were flattering a wicked person. But the discussion regarding Mutter Lahachnaf l'Rishon Ba'al Mazef, you permitted to flatter a wicked person in this world. 6 statements of Rabbi Lazar regarding a person who occupies himself with Chanifa and what is considered. And the parak concludes with Arba Kitas Imekablas Pnei that there's 4 groups of people that don't receive the divine presence. Kat Leitzim, the group of scoffers, Bekat Chanefim, the group of flatterers, Bekat Shakarim, the group of liars, and Bekat Masak Lashon Hara, and the group of those who say Lashon Hara, which again, that's the concept of these are kats. It's not stam if a person one time does this thing, it's like he's part of those groups. So to begin the current Daf, first we finish up the previous Mishnah, second line down to the top of the Amud. The Mishnah said, V'koine achrei mois, that the Kohen Gadol would read for Pasha achrei mois, which we just had the other week, which talks about Navod Yom Kippurim, the Achba Aser, which we just had in this week's Parsha, which talks about the Yom Tiv of Yom Kippurim. So, and then the last part, the Mishnah said he rolls up the Torah, and then he lanes from Parashas Bamidbar, which are the Masafim. The Gemara wonders, V'demini seems to be contradicted this halacha from the Mishnah Mesechtas Megillah. Because what we say? We said he lanes from Achrei Mois and Achba Aser, which is Achrei Mois, and then he mishes past Kedoshim to Parashas Emor, and he lanes it from the same Sefer Torah. Problem is, the Mishnah says Megillah Medal Gimanavi, you're allowed to skip when you're laning from Navi, but the Imedal Gimatayr, you cannot skip when you're laning from the Torah. Meaning, you can't go from one and mish and roll the Torah to the next part. So the question is, how did the Kohen Gadol over here lane from Parsha Achrei Mois from the beginning and go roll the Torah? You have to skip till Parshas Emor. So Rabbi says, like Kash, it's not difficult because Khan, the Mishnah Mesechta Megillah, is told about B'chdei Yifsek HaTurgeman, that the translator will have already interrupted the amount of time it takes for him to translate till you get up to the next place that you're rolling the Sefer Torah. Then you're not allowed to skip. But Khan, our Mishnah is B'chdei Yifsek HaTurgeman. The translator has not stopped yet translating. Because like Rashi explains, the Parsha of Shor Chesed that we had in this week's Parsha, Parshas Emor, was close to Parshas Achrei Mois. The translator didn't finish translating until he's already up to Achba Aser. And he starts when he finishes. So, I guess they had a quick roller. It's not really so far. So therefore, that's not a problem. But the Gemara says, wait a second, that's not really such a great answer. Because Valokatani, that Mishnah within Megillah explains and says, Medalgin b'Navi ve'medalgin b'Torah. Yeah, like we just mentioned before, you could skip by Navi, but you cannot skip by the Torah. But says the Mishnah, but ad kama medalgin, meaning by Navi, when I said you could skip, how much can you skip? Said the Mishnah, ad kedei sh'liyisik haTurgeman. The amount of time that the translator will not have stopped translating yet. Wait a second, that's by Navi when you could skip. Mechlal, the inference is b'Torah klal klaloi. That when you're landing from the Torah, you're not allowed to skip even B'chdei Shalai Yisik HaTurgeman. So how's that answering the question? Selom Abaye, Rad Abaye says like Kasha. He says one level more. It's not difficult because Kan, our Mishnah is Be'inyan Echa. When we're skipping in the Torah from Achrei Mois to Emor, it's in one topic. Because our Mishnah, both of them are talking about Yom Kippurim. So therefore, since it's one topic, and you're skipping B'chdei Shalai Yifsik, it's not going to, the translator will still have been saying you're already up to Achba Aser, then you're allowed to skip. But Khan, in that Mishnah, in the Bryson that was saying that even if they're not going to be mafsek or turgum and you cannot skip, that's b'shnei inyanim. That's when it's two different topics. Which, let's say, one's talking about Yom Kippur, one's talking about Shabbos, or some other parsha. Which, as Rashi explains, what happens is that a person is not going to follow another topic because it's going to be quickly lost from him to understand something else. So therefore, when it comes to the Torah, which all the mitzvahs are dependent on, that's actually why we do Kriyas HaTorah. So we want the tzibur to hear it. So one pasuk, if he's not going to understand, he's going to forget it, and he's going to violate it, he's not going to fulfill it, and there's going to come a destruction from that. So therefore, you cannot skip from topic to topic, even if the translator didn't finish yet, and it's not going to be an interruption. But by Navi, which is not really halacha, it's more musa, so there you could skip. So even if it's two different topics, as long as it's lo yifsek argument, so that it always has to be that there's no gap. But the difference is by Teda has to be that one topic, like our Mishnah. But if it's not the same topic, then even if lo yifsek argument, you cannot skip. And the Gemara says Vatanya. Usually Vatanya is a question, but here, and as we learned in the Brisa says medalgim b'Torah b'inyan you could skip when you're learning from the Torah if it's the same topic. Ubinavi b'shnei inyanim, and by Navi, even if it's two different topics, and for sure if it's the same topic, and v'kan, but either one by Torah and Navi is b'chdish l'yifsek haTorah. You can't have a gap. You can't have the translator there mezitztas of a goyim, and then we're waiting for it to roll. That can't be. But by Torah has to be the same topic. Navi can be two different topics. Now, once we wrote in the Bryce, so we continue finishing the Bryce. So even by Navi that you could skip, you cannot skip from one sefer to another sefer of Navi. But in Navi Shoshnei Maser, we have Trei Aser, which has 12 different Neviyos. Then in Medalgim there you could skip from one Navi to the other one because, like Rashi says, all considered as one sefer. Now, as long as you don't skip from the back to the beginning, meaning you can't go backwards. You can skip, but you can't go from Malachi going back to a previous one that's before. Now, continuing with the halacha of the Mishnah, we said, okay, he lanes these two parshas of Achrei Mos in the beginning only over there, which talks about the avodah of Yom Kippurim, and Emod over there where it talks about that we have these last week parshas Yom Kippurim. And then with Goylas HaTorah, they roll up the Sefer Torah, they do Galila, he puts it in his bosom, etc. And he gives his whole drasha saying, Rabbi Isa, I want you to know more than what's read over here is in this Torah scroll. So it says the Gemara, why does he have to have this whole drasha to tell them about that? Just know that there's more in this Torah over here. It says the Gemara, not to spread rumors about the Sefer Torah that people shouldn't say, of course he's landing by heart that third parsha. It's not written over here. This is a Sefer that is distorted. And therefore, he's saying it by heart. So we see even for a Sefer Torah, it would only be Motzi Laz, therefore he makes this announcement. Now we said, and that as the Mishnah said about the 10th of the month of Tishrei, which is Yom Kippurim of the Sefer Bamidbar, which talks about the Musaf, and that could up that he would lane by heart. Says the Gemara, why? Why don't you roll the Torah and lane from Parshas Pinchas? Why don't you go through the Musafim in the Torah? So my point about Yehuda, Rav Sheish says, we don't roll the Torah scroll in public. It says, okay, you don't want to, it says for the Olam to wait. But why don't you bring another Sefer Torah? Bring another Sefer Torah and lane from it. It says, no, Rav Yehuda, he said, because of the disgrace, the deficiency of the first one, of the first Sefer Torah, people shouldn't say, they probably found something possible with it. Was Beckman do Nocha Sefer Torah? So because of that, we don't bring another Sefer Torah. Reb Shimon Lakish says a different shot. Because you don't make an unnecessary bracha. What's going to happen is you're going to have to make another bracha when you bring another Sefer Torah. So since we don't want to make an unnecessary bracha, we're going to rather lay them by heart. So the Gemara says, asking on the first shot of Rav Huna, we're really concerned for Pagam, for the deficiency and not let to bring another Sefer Torah because why they're not just missing from the first one? He says the following halacha. If Rosh Chodesh Tevis falls on Shabbos, which we know is Chanukah, we start Chafei Kislev and it goes to Rosh Chodesh. Maybe Shalish Tevis V'Kaira, big skula, they have been busy with the 3 Sefer Torah. Bring 3 Sefer Torah in your lane. Why 3 Sefer Torah? Achas Binyan Shel Yom. One is the topic of the day, the parasha of the week, according to the parashas of Torah. V'achas Rosh Chodesh. One is relaying from Rosh Chodesh, which is the karbonos of Rosh Chodesh. V'achas B'Shel Chanukah, and one is Chanukah, which relaying by the Nisim. So what's this? What's with Pugama Yishol Rishon V'Sheni? How you bring another Sefer Torah? Why are you not laying off from the first one? Says the Gemara, no, it's lost a Gavri, but lost a Sefer. 3 people in 3 different Sefer Torah, 3 different aliyahs. Like a Pugama, it's not Pugam. Each one is getting his own Sefer Torah. Chad Gavri, but today Sifri, one person, the Kohen Gadol with 2 different Svarim. Ikke Pugama, that's a Pugam, and therefore we don't bring another Sefer Torah, and therefore he lanes the last parasha by heart. Now we said, Mavarech Allah Shmoyne Brachas B'chulu. Kohen Gadol, he makes 8 brachas when after he finished the laning, similar to what we do when we finish the Haftarah, and after we have Birchas HaTorah, after we get Aliyah. So he would make these 8 brachas. So the Mishnah mentioned what they are, but the Gemara brings a brisa that elaborates. Tanabon a brisa. So first you make a bracha on the Torah Gedech Shemavachim Beis HaKnesses. Just like in the shul, when you finish your Aliyah, Asher Nosel on the Torah Asemes, so he makes the bracha on the Torah. And Valavoida, that's the bracha Britzei, Valadah, and that's the bracha Moidim, Val Mechilas Ovain, and the bracha on forgiving of the sin, Ketiknon, the way it is as we have in Shemona Esther, the middle bracha on Yom Kippurim is Mechilas Ovain. Ala Mikdash B'nei Hasmei, they made a separate bracha on the base of Mikdash, that they had such a thing. Vala Kaham B'nei Hasmei, the bracha on the Kahanim for themselves, Al Yisrael B'nei Hasmei, the Jewish people for themselves, Val Yerushalayim B'nei Hasmei, and for Yerushalayim itself. And then as the Gemara quotes in the Mishnah, V'hashar Tefillah, on the rest, prayer. So what does that mean? Then the Brisa, Hashar, that is one bracha, that in it is tefillah, prayer, tchina, supplication, rina, song, bakasha, and request, sha'amcha Yisrael tzrichim le'yosheya, that your people, the Jews, need to be saved. We would conclude b'shanei tefillah that he hears the prayer. Mikan ve'elach. After that point onwards, after the Kohen Gadol finished laning the parasha with the brachas, kol echad ve'echad, every single person from the tzibur, maybe Sefer Torah M'tech Beis, he would bring a Sefer Torah from his house to the Azar, as Rashi explains, either because he holds there's no what's called Eidav Haitzah Yom Kippurim. Yom Kippurim does not have an Isser of Haitzah, or Yerushalayim, the doors will close at nighttime, so therefore you're allowed to be Ma'arav, you're allowed to make an Eruv throughout Yerushalayim. Either way, they were able to carry, and they brought their Sefer Torah from the house, and they would all lane in the Azara, Allah Yidin Tzazaman would bring their Sefer Torah and they would lane from it. Says why so much that everyone did this? Because they wanted to show what the look of their Sefer Torah was and how beautiful it was. Because the Gemara says in the beginning, it says, there's no Daf Beis and Beis. What does it mean? This is my God and I will glorify him. You should be hisna'al of the mitzvahs. You should beautify yourself in front of Hashem with mitzvahs. So Zana Shena Sefer Torah, Shena Tzitzis, of course the beautiful silver esrog box, you don't get it for the item, then you weren't mekayim the mitzvahs. This is what it is, because you have to beautify, and they wanted to show this l'rabim to the public, kikvi shayin mana Sefer Torah is, and therefore that's why they did that on Yom Kippurim. Then the next Mishnah continues with the next item that we said in the Mishnah of Eilu Ne'marim B'Chaloshin, and then those that are said B'Lashon HaKodesh. The one that is also B'Lashon HaKodesh was the Parshas HaMelech. The psukim that the king reads during the mitzvah of Hakel had to be in the actual Hebrew, in the Lashon HaKodesh of the Sefer Devarim of the Mishnah Torah. Says the Mishnah, Ketzad, how did this go down? When and how was this Parshas HaMelech? So the Mishnah explains, Matzah Yom Tov Rishon Shel Chag. After the first day, we call it first days because of Chutz La'aretz, after the first day of Sukkot, Bishmini, which the Gemara is going to ask, what does that mean? On the 8th day of Sukkot, didn't you just say, B'matzah Yom Tov Rishon? Noch the erste Tag? Noch the erste Tag after the first day? So the Gemara answers, actually, it's not Bishmini, it's Bishminis, with a Saf. What is Bishminis? In the 8th year, meaning Matzah Shviyas, Noch HaShemitah on Sukkot, in the beginning of the 8th year, we call that the Hakel year. Stu Hasidim, they celebrate Hakel year. That's the year after Shemitah, so that's what really B'Shmini means. It doesn't mean the 8th day of Sukkot, Shmini Atzeres, it means the 8th year. But Matzah Shviyas after the Shemitah year. Okay, what would they do? Oiseloi, bima, shal eitz, ba'azar, they would make a platform of wood in the courtyard. And the king would sit on it. Shemag to the pasuk in the bottom. Okay, Sheba Shalom at the end of 7 years, B'moyed in the Yom Tov of Sukkot, V'goyim, etc. Then the king would read from Mishnah Torah, and that was the Hakil. All the people would come. Now the way they did this was that Chazan HaKnesses Nitl Sefer Torah. So, like we said, the Shamish would take the Sefer Torah, V'noisna L'roish HaKnesses, I don't know if it's called the sexton or whatever, and he would give it to the one in charge of the shul, which is basically the gabbai. V'roish HaKnesses Noisna like skan. Then the one in charge of the shul would give it to the deputy Kohen Gadol. Vaskan Noisna Kohen Gadol, and then the deputy would give it to the Kohen Gadol, to the high priest. And the Kohen Gadol Noisna Melech, and then the high priest would give it to the king. The Melech Oymen, the king would stand up, receive the Sefer Torah, and he would read it sitting down.
What particular Torah the Kohen Gadol had his own always with him? This was
You mean the Melech? The Melech always had the one he would which Sefer Torah was this? Doesn't say. I'm not sure if it had to be a specific one. But Agrifas, I mean they had it within the Azara Sefer Torah. That was the one they compared every Torah to that one in the Azara. Agrippas HaMelech, who he was king of the Jewish people, but he was from the descendants of Hordis, which he was the one that the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed in his days. So he was Amad V'Kibul. What he would do actually, he would stand up and he would receive the Torah. V'Kara Oimet, he actually read it standing up. The Chachamim, they actually praised him for doing this practice. Now, Shagia, when he got up to what it says in Devarim, it says, he got up to the pasuk, it says, you're not allowed to place upon yourself a foreign man as a king over you. So his eyes were dripping tears, because essentially this pasuk invalidated him from being the king. Amrullah, they said to him, Agrippas, don't be afraid. You're our brother, which because his mother was Jewish. So don't worry, you're not a foreign man. Then the Mishnah continues, so how was this actually read? So v'kaidei mitchilas elad varim. So it would start from the beginning of we call Mishnah Torah, Sefer Dvarim, from the beginning of elad varim, ad Shema, until in Parsha V'Eschanan where it says the Parsha Shema. Then he would lay in B'Shema. Then he would lay in B'Hayim B'Shemaya, even though it's not near each other, he would skip. And then he would skip to Aser. And then he would skip and lay in Kisachal Aser when you finish giving your maestros. And then he would go backwards. He would roll back and lay in Parshas HaMelech, which is a Simalai Melech, which obviously he's the king, he's reading that. And then the Brachas Klalis, which are the curses and the blessings that the Leviim did by Hagrizim HaEvel. Ad Shegoymer Kol HaParsha, until he finishes the whole parsha. Now, Rashi explains why they did this, because Shema is Kabbalas Ol Malchus Shemayim. Vayim Shemaya is Kabbalas Ol Mitzvahs. Like the Gemara says in Brachas David Gimel. So the Brachas and Klolis. The Kabbalah of the Brises of the Torah that we mentioned in the previous Dafim, which we're accepting that in the Hakli year. And then they would publicize to the public Aser to Aser and Kisachal al Aser. Why are we talking about Meiser Daf? Because other things are big tenets. Why these things? Because this is Sukkot, if you remember, like we said. That's Chag Asif. That's when everyone's bringing in all their bounty that they got from the whole year. That's the time of Matnas Aliyim and separating Trumas and Meisters. Now, even though the Parsha of the Melech is actually between Aser to Aser and Kisachal al Aser, so why do you skip that? Because you want to lean the Parshas of Meisters together without interruption, and then you go back to read for the Parshas of Melech. And you tell me you're skipping in the Torah. I thought you're not supposed to skip that if the Turguman is going to be stopping, and here it's going to take time to roll. Says Rashi, the Melech doesn't have a Turguman. There's no one translating after him. So I guess it doesn't have that problem of that when the Turguman's stopping and everyone's like, no, this guy through. When someone's doing it himself or something from Rashi, that doesn't bother us. That, clears his throat, is But when there's a Turguman, it was like, what's going on? Why are they waiting? It was. What? Yeah. Shaila is what that means. Is that because of the Maturgim? Or maybe that's here it's different because he's the Melech is himself? Yeah, but that's what Rashi says, that it doesn't have a Turgum, so it's not going to be concerned about the skipping. And continues the Gemara. Now, Bircha Shekoyin Godel Mevarach, which we actually just said on Daf Mem Beis, even though Rashi brings from Yom Daf Samachez, but on Yom Kippurim, after the Pesukim of the Parsha, he would make 8 brachas. So those same brachas, Hamelch Mevarach Haisam. The king would also make those 8 brachas after he read, but the one difference is, El Shanois Shal Regalim, he would insert the Yom Tovim, Mekadesh Yisrael Bazmanim, obviously Tachas Mechilas HaAvoim, in place of the bracha of forgiving of his sins, which that was by Yom Kippurim by the Kohen Gadol. Now the Melech is doing on Sukkot, so obviously he would just switch the Yom Tovim for the Yom Kippurim Nusach. Now the Gemara goes back to the beginning of the Mishnah that we said, when do we do this Hakil? So we said that it's Matzah Yom Tov Rishon of Sukkot, Bishmini. Says Gemara, Verstehnish. Bishmini Sukkot Eidach, how could it be the 8th day of Sukkot when you told me it's after the first day of Sukkot? And it says the Gemara, Bishmin, it's like we already explained in the Mishnah, in the 8th year. So the Gemara wonders, why do you need so many signs to define in the Pasuk when this was? You tell me it's Mekei Shnas HaShmita, at the end of the Shemitah year, which I know that's Tishrei of the 8th year, because that's right after the 7th year. Then you tell me it's also B'chag HaSukkos, and you tell me B'moyed. Why do you have to tell me the Yom Tov Sukkos after the 7th year? So the Gemara says Shrichi was necessary. Why? Because Rachman Mekei had the pasuk only said at the end of 7 years, I would have said that Nimdu Mahashta. This was said to the Jewish people in Arvis Mayav at the end of 40 years in the desert. I would have thought to say, okay, after 7 years from this point, even though they didn't have Shemitah yet, because they didn't start counting the Shemitah years until after 7 years of conquering Eretz Yisrael and another 7 years of dividing Eretz Yisrael, as the Gemara says in Eichem Nafin Beis Beis. So therefore, because like Mother Shemitah, I needed to say that not only Kate Shevashanim, but I had to say Shnas HaShemitah, that only when Shemitah was there, then after every 7 years. Okay, because like Mother Shemitah hadn't said Shemitah, I would have thought to say B'Soiv Shemitah. Yeah, at the end of the Shemitah year, before Rosh Hashanah of the 8th year, because that's literally the end of the 7 years, at the end of the year. So Kazach Mana B'Mayid had to tell me, no, not at the end of the 7th year, had to be after the 7th year in the Yom Tov of Sukkot. Now, if Kazach B'Mayid had its own B'Mayid, okay, I wouldn't know what Mayid means. Having B'Rei Shat, I would have thought to say, okay, the beginning of the year, because they're all called Mayid, like it says, Eila Mayad De Hashem, and that's also considering Rosh Hashanah. So I would have thought maybe in Rosh Hashanah is when you do Hakel. No, because Rachman B'Chag HaSukkot says on the Yom Tov of Sukkot, tell me specifically Sukkot. Now because Rachman B'Chag HaSukkot had it said B'Chag HaSukkot, I would have thought to say, I follow Yom Tov Achron, even the last day of Yom Tov of Sukkot. Because Rachman, that's what Terry wrote, B'Vaykol Yisrael, when all the Jewish people come as we continue to the days, which teaches us Maschalta Demoy. When Mekunt. What?
You just said Chag HaSukkot, then you might.
Oh, so Taisus says, Hashtag Sibachag HaSukkot b'moed lomali. And there's another question. They looked at Mekei Shevashanim Shnas HaShemitah by Kol Yisrael L'Rois. I would know that it's not Rosh Hashanah. Then they don't, because they're not coming Boim L'Rois. Like we just say the Drush of the second, that it's when they're all coming, they don't come then. Then he says, I would have thought to say Chag HaMatzos. That's when you need B'Chag HaSukkot. But then you wouldn't need b'moed. So he says, the reason why it's necessary is because B'Kol Yisrael L'Rois sounds like Maschalta D'Moed B'Yom Rishon Kamashma B'Moed Kamashma B'Toich HaMoed. Not the first day, but within the Moed. And B'Kol Yisrael D'Mashma Maschalta D'Moed, but not Yom Beis or Yom Gimel. Has to be the first day of Chol HaMoed. But he says Rashi has a different interpretation, which we're going to say right now, which he doesn't like, because the Gemara says B'Kol Yisrael, as we continue to come in Beis, we said Maschalta D'Moed. So in the beginning of the Yom Tov. So Rashi says, wait a second. So why isn't it the first day of Yom Tov? Taisus whole shtickle Taita tells you why. That's why it actually says it, to tell you it's in the Yom Tov, not the first day of the Yom Tov. So Taisus has in the Drasha. Rashi asks the question. So why don't you do the first day of Yom Tov? Says Rashi, no, because fixing the bima is not, it can't be deicha to make the bima, cannot be deicha Shabbos or Yom Tov. Now, says Rashi, so why couldn't you do it Erev Yom Tov? Says, no, it's tightly spaced. There's no room in the Azar. And he says, actually, Yerushalmi brings such a Zach in Megillah that says that you delay Hakil if it falls out on Shabbos. Why? Because the bima. So why didn't you make it the day before? Says Yerushalmi, no, Dachal Azar, and this two came plots. Taish doesn't like that from Rashi, that because the tikkun the bima is not Deicha Yom Tov. He says, what do you mean? Since the Gzeres HaKasav is from Aschal to the Mayit, so they should do without a bima. You have to have a bima. Manolan the bima ma'akev. If that's really what it meant, with Aschal to the Mayit, there's no line un kein bima. So he says if he likes his pshat, that no forget, that's what the drasha is actually coming to tell you, the Mayit, that it should be not in the beginning, but actually should be in the Yom Tov, meaning day 2, not the first day. And then Taisa says, Agav, he says, it seems that actually building the bima from Erev Yom Tov is of different parts. In Chol HaMoed, you can't make any binyan. Rather, it's only because it's made out of parts. If they hadn't built it from before Yom Tov, it says it would seem that building it would actually not be Deichel in Chol HaShemayim. So Taisa says, but they had already built it and you just have to put it back together again, so it's not considered like such a binyan. But be that as it may, that's why we need all these different terminologies in the pasuk to let you know exactly the day, which is the second day of Sukkot, to tell you that that's when you have Hakil by the Melech of Sefer Devarim at the end of the Shemitah. Now the Mishnah had said that, okay, Chazan HaKnesses is Netel Sefer Torah, and when they saw the Knesses, you said it went through the whole thing, the Shamash gave it to the Gabbat, the Gabbat to the Skan to the Kohen to the Melech. Says the Gemara, as we said this on the previous Mishnah too, Shamet Mino, we can hear from this, is Cholkin Kavil Tam Makam Arav. You see, you allowed to give honor to the student in front of the Rav. You have a Chushva Chavrisa who's in front of the Ruv, and you say, you stand up for your Chavrisa, and the Ruv is right there, you're giving cover to the Talmud B'Makam Arav. So the Amabai says, no, it's not a raya. Kula Mishum Kavayda the Melech. This that the Shamash gives to the Gabba, who is he trains him, and then he gives to this guy. All is just to show that let's keep on going up higher on this totem pole. The top is the Melech. This is all the cover to him to show that he's the highest of them all. But really, maybe you cannot give cover to the Talmud, the Mokum Dirab. Now the Mishnah said, the king would get up and receive the title, but he would lay it sitting down. So the Mishnah there, Agrippas HaMelech, however, Ahmed V'Kibo, he got up, he stood up and received it, and B'Kari Ahmed, he read it standing. So it says the Gemara, wait a second, Ahmed, you tell me the king would stand up? Machal V'Yoshev. Here it says he was sitting. But the master says, and Yeshiva B'Adazada, L'malcha Beis David Mulvad, the only one that could sit in the courtyard are the kings of the Davidic dynasty, but not for the Malchus Beis Chashmonai. And that's where Agrippas came from. Shneimah says the pasuk Shmuel Beis, V'Yovet Melech David V'Yishlo V'nei Hashem. That King David came and he sat in front of Hashem, and he said, but that's only Malchus Beis David. How was it possible? Agrippas was sitting and he stood up. Says the Gemara, because they said, Be'ezas Nashim. That was regarding a different teaching. Hachanam, it's also Be'ezas Nashim. This that he was sitting.
But it says Ovid.
What?
But it says Ovid.
I mean, he was sitting. So how was he sitting till then? Because it was in the Ezra's Nashim. That's not the Azara. That's the women's courtyard. That you're allowed to sit over there. And this that he stood up and he lay standing. So V'shimchu Chacham. The Chacham praised him for doing this. It says Gemara, they praised him. Obviously that he did well. Rashi says, even according to the one that says, which this is brought in Kedushin in the first paragraph of Lamavazim base. No, that if the leader, if the one in charge of the Bezdin, of the Sanhedrin, if he's Meichel is on the Kavod Machal is on, is forgiven, is pardoned. But the king who pardons his honor is not pardoned. Shemach says the pasuk in the bottom. Son doesn't you shall surely place upon you yourself a king, meaning his awe has to be on you. He can't be pardoning. He's supposed to instill awe and fear in the people. So it's always going to be like that. He can't be Meichel. So how could he have been Meichel on his covered and stand up? He should be reading it sitting down. Says the Gemara, a mitzvah shani. A mitzvah is different. Here he was doing for the purposes of a mitzvah, which Taisa actually brings seemingly contradictions to these ideas that even for a mitzvah, they, like for let's say Kabbalah's ponim by a kala or other things, which is a mitzvah, the king is still not supposed to be moichal kavayda. So Taisa makes a chiluk and he says that when do we say mitzvah shani? If he's moichel on this cover, the cover ateder, the cover ashchina. That's when we say, that he can be moichel on kavod. But if let's say he's moichel on his cover for cover of a bust of a dam, like for example a kala or talmud chacham, there exists a custom is that he's not supposed to be moichel, even though that's a mitzvah, because his lashon hatais is mitzvah's kibbut atzmai. The honor of the mitzvah, his own honor, which they have to honor the covenant of the melech, is greater than the mitzvah of kibbut that the chiyuv the melech has to treat them, because they also have same tasam lecha melech, that his aim has to be on them and not theirs on him. So it comes out that this that the king would honor him is not a mitzvah, because the mitzvah requires them to honor him. When we say mitzvah shani is when for the sefer Torah. Kavanah Teda, Kavanah Shchina, not when we say Kavanah Teda, we usually mean for Talmud Chacham. Not that Kavanah Teda. That Kavanah Teda, he's not supposed to honor Talmud Chacham. But the Torah itself, that he could stand and lane, because that's the Kavanah of the Shchina. That's what we mean when we say Mitzvah Shami.
In his cover.
And who? So you're saying he also has that, but even so he's allowed to give that up for the Torah itself, right? Because that's everything, yeah. So then the Mishnah said, now when Agrippas got up to this pasuk that he's not supposed to place upon himself a foreign man, so his eyes were dripping tears. So Tana Mishmei did they learned, but then what happened was they consoled him. They said, "Don't worry, Agrippas. Bins Inzer Brid, you're one of us," because his mother was Jewish. But Tana Mishmei did we learned the Bais name of Nasim that Ba'isa Shah that moment is Chaybu Sonei Yisrael. We don't want to curse the Jewish people, so we call it a euphemism that the enemies of the Jewish people, referring to the Yidden, they were liable for Kaliyah to be annihilated. Why? Because they flattered Agrippas, and that's not something that is supposed to be done. Which Amr B'Shimon Chalafta, he says that which Tais actually discusses what was the problem, brings him the Yerushalmi, that many people died that day, that they flattered him. Says, what's the pshat? His mother was Jewish, but it was disgraceful. So the question is, for such a kleine zach, such a kleine chanufa, such a einish gadol, how is it possible that this would happen? That such a great straf, such a big punishment. So Tyson brings that. Truth is that even though they didn't have to necessarily protest, but should have been quiet and not strengthen him. And that's the einish of chanufa that we find by Dvar Avera. If someone flatters his friend because he's afraid of him, so essentially what you're doing then is that, but you're not concerned for why you're not afraid of a Rebbeinu Shalom. You make like as if Hashem doesn't see. That's a big problem. So maybe you don't have to be Meicha, maybe you could Zog garnish. But when you're saying, no, don't worry, so you mean you're afraid of him. But what's the mid-covered Shemayim? That's the straf, that's the punishment that many people died because of the flattery that they made for Agrippas. It says, so although that's the word like Agrippas, but actually Rashi says that the word Agrippa is like the word koicha. The day that there was strengthened the power of shalchanufa, of flattery, because Rashi explains that since, even though his mother was Jewish, he's not fit to be a king because he was a slave, and it's a disgrace to the Jewish people that he should be the king. So that was this problem about flattery. So from that point onwards, this Afsu Hadinin, the judgments became distorted because the litigants would flatter the judges. Actually, the judges would flatter the litigants, meaning people like the Rav himself he's intimidated. He wants to flatter the wealthy contributor or the skalkla maisim, and the actions became ruined, meaning that the great ones saw the sinners. They didn't protest because again flattery. He doesn't want to say anything because he's a big constituent or whatever. That's the problem with flattery, is that people want to find grace in people's eyes, and no one could tell his friend that my actions are greater than your actions, because like Rashi explains, since no one's protesting against the sinners, so everyone is learning to follow them. Comes out everyone is like the herd mentality. Everyone's just like no one wants to say anything, and everyone's doing the same problems with all the things that we have. So that all happened from the flattery, and the power of flattery became strong. Now, however, he says, you're allowed to flatter wicked people in this world. Somebody says in Pasuk, in Yeshaya, you're not going to call anymore the disgraceful person a big nadiv, a big donator. And Rashi is like it's a terminology of kol sanavshi, which is like desire. Meaning this guy always wants to be drinking. You're not going to call him anymore that he's a noble person. Meaning, says the Gemara, the input says this word yolado. So this guy is a mamash, a novel. You call him wow, this guy's mamash. He donates to the shul, whatever. And this guy is drinking all day. This is mamash, a noble person. This guy gets up, gets by the kiddush, and he makes a gross mishavedich. You know what I'm saying? So this is flattery. This is chanifa. And this is permitted in this world, says Reb Shimon ben Pazim. Now, Reb Shimon Lakish maybe it's a different source, Mahalcha Pasuk in Bereshis. It says, where Yaakov is telling to Esav, Kirois Panei Elikim, says, oh wow, now that I saw your face, it's like seeing the face of God, Vatatzeni, and that you're appeased by me. So you see, like, obviously he wasn't happy to see Esav, but there's a bit of flattery. It says, wow, it's seeing you. Upliga. Now, this teaching of Rish Lakish that says that Yaakov was trying to flatter Esav to say, wow, like seeing your face, mamash like a malach, so good to see you. It disagrees with Reb Levi, because actually Reb Levi says that he wasn't trying to flatter him; he was actually trying to intimidate him. He was trying to let him know that he always saw malachim. Reb Levi says, "Mashal Yaakov Esav mother with them." What could you compare this exchange between Yaakov and Esav to? La'adam shazim es chaver. Someone invited his friend. He recognized that he wants to kill him. Somebody says to him, Tam tafshel zeh shani ten. He says, wow, this dish that I'm tasting over here, this tastes like what I tasted yesterday when I was by the king, when I had a court with the king. It tastes like the same type of dish. The guy says, this guy obviously, he knows the king. He'll be afraid he won't kill him. Here also he was saying, wow, your face is mamash like the Pnei Elikim, like mamash like all the malachim that I would see. Your face mamash looks like them. He's like, he knows malachim. He's not going to want to start up with him. So it wasn't flattery, it was actually intimidation. Amar Belaza, he says these teachings regarding chanufa, kolon shish bechanufa, which this is actually the first one of them. Whoever has flattery, maybe afla brings anger to the world. Shemlik says the pasuk in Iyov. V'chanfei leiv, and the flatterers of the heart, Yisimo Af, will place anger. Not only that, Ella she'ain tfilasei nishmas. His prayer is not heard. It says there at the end of the pasuk, Lo yeshavu, they won't scream ki asagam because they're tied up, but it also could mean like because they're afflicted, like Yisurim, meaning when the Yisurim are going to come onto them, their screams will not help, it will not be effective. So that's actually the first of 6, which Simon and the Mnemonic for the 6th teaching of Belazar on Chanufa is Af, Ubad, Kehenim, Biyodoi, Nida, and Gerla. So the first one we just said was the Af, and whoever has Chanufa brings Af la'olam. The second one is Va'amar and Belazar, Kalon Shish Bechanufa, anyone that has flattery, I feel Ubadim Shebemei Iman Mekam Loisei. Very interesting. Even the fetuses in their mother's wombs curse them. So you walk by a pregnant woman, they're cursing this guy who's the flatterer. Shlomo says the pasuk in Mishlei. He tells the wicked person, Tzadikata, your mamash a tzaddik, wow, to see you. Yikvu amim, the amim, which is the people will curse him, yizamu le'umim. The nations will have fury against him. Now, when it says Yikvu, ve'en koivel l'klala, that will mean it's cursed. Like it says, that God didn't curse that time by Bill, but you see that Yikvu means cursing. Ve'en la'oim, when it says le'umim, that actually refers to Elu Bottom, that actually refers to fetuses. It's the pasuk in Bereshis, when Rivka had this thrashing in her, in the womb, well, she went to shame, and he says, one nation from the other nation will overpower. But these were babies, they were fetuses. So you see the word la'im could mean a fetus. That's how we know that someone who does chanufa has even the babies in the mother's stomach are cursing him. Another teaching, Rabbi Shloimy says, "Kol adam shesh bechanufa." Any person that has flattery, neifel begehenna, he falls into Gehenna. Shlomo says the pasuk in Yeshaya, "Hoy, woe ha'onim l'rat toiv l'toiv ra b'gomer." Woe to those who say bad is good and good is bad, which that's what the flatterers do. They take the bad people and they say, "Your mom is amazing," and I can't believe it. Such an honor to know you. What does it say afterwards? Therefore, the way the tongue of fire consumes straw, and the way the stubble, the flame will burn that up, etc. You see that the fires of Gehenna will take a hold of someone who has chanufa. Another teacher, Rabbi Shloimy says, whoever flatters a friend, so if never be other, he actually falls into the hands of the guy that he's flattering. The meaning never be other, if he doesn't fall into the hands of that one, never be adbonam, he falls into the hands of his sons. The meaning never be adbonam, he doesn't fall into the hands of his sons, never be adbenbana, he falls in the hands of his grandson. Shlomo says the pasuk in Yeshaya. It says, Yomי, and the gear says actually, Yomי Hanavi says El Chananya. Now, what happened was, this Chananya said a false prophecy regarding Golas Yechanya and regarding the holy vessels of the Beis Hamikdash that were exiled with him. He said, in another 2 years, like as if he's talking from Hashem, I'm going to return them to this holy place. So Yirmiyah knew he was lying. He knows that the Golas is for 70 years. So he says, Amen, Kenyas Hashem. He tells the false prophet, yes, so Hashem should do. Yokum Hashem is the Hashem should fulfill your words. Now that was flattery, because he should have said straight out, you're a liar, you're a Navi Sheker. Except now, what does it say later on? After many days, Yirmi was going out of Yerushalayim to go to Eretz Binyamin to divide a nachla which he had inherited. So as we continue in Membezim and Aleph, it says over there by Yehu B'Shar Binyamin. So Yirmi was there by the gate of the nachla of Binyamin. B'Sham Bal Pekidos, there was an official officer over there. Ushma Yir'iya ben Shalemya ben Chananya. So this Chananya that he had flattered, that Navi Sheker, his Einikel, his grandson, was there, an official. He grabbed hold of Yirmiyah Navi saying, you're trying to go to the Kazdim. He says, Sheker, name, false. And then he fall al Kazdim. I'm not going to fall on the Kazdim, etc. Which the pasuk says over there, he didn't listen to him. It says there at the end of the pasuk, but Yitpois, and the gear says, Yiryahu ben Shalemya, he grabbed a hold of Yirmiyahu. He brought him to the ministers. Again, an Einikel of Chananya, who he flattered, he ended up falling into his hands. Another teaching from the Amr of Elazar.
So why did Navi Yirmiyah?
Why did he flatter?
Yeah.
Good child. You have to know. Maybe he felt it was necessary. And sometimes even when things are necessary, there's still going to be a reaction to what you have to do. Another teacher from Elazar says, "Kol Eidishish b'chanufa." Any assembly, any community that has flattery, Ma'usa Kanida is repulsive like a menstruating woman. Shlomo says the pasuk in Eve, it says, Ki ados choniv galmud, because the community of flattery is galmud. Now what is galmud? Shekim b'kurach hayom, in the maritime cities, they call a nida galmuda. So you see, they consider like a nida. My galmuda, why is a nida called galmuda? Because gemula, and the Ger says da, so gemula da mi bala. What does that mean? Like we find in Vayigam al Yitzchak, Yigama means weaned, separated. So she is separated from her husband. That's what a nida is. That's how a community with flattery is. They're like a nida. They're like separated. Another teacher, Mamman Balazar, says called Indish for any community that has flattery. L'seif Kaila at the end is exile. Ksiv Acha says over here Kadas Chanav Galmoid, because the assembly of the flattery is Galmoid. Now, Ksiv Hasman says over there, plus in Yeshaya Vamart, you're going to say in your heart, Miyoladli say, who gave birth to me these? Vanishachula vegalmud, and I am forlorn and I am galmuda. Goyla, besucha, begaymer, exiled and forlorn, etc. So you see, galmuda refers to goyla, and if they have chanifa, which is galmud, they're going to go into exile. Now the parak concludes, there are 4 groups that don't accept the face of divine presence. Who are these 4 groups? Katleitzim, the group of scoffers, the people make jokes about everything. Nothing has any seriousness to it. Vikat Chanifim, the group of flatterers. They just flatter everyone, and they're like, there's nothing that's good or bad, and everyone is good. And Vikat Shekadim, the group of liars. Everything's a lie. Vikat Mesapri Lashon Hara, and the group of those who say Lashon Hara. And again, the importance is Vikat, the groups of that. This is what they do. saying Lashon Hara. And the Gemara brings a riot to each one of these cutlates, and the group of the scoffers, the Chazal said the pasuk in Hosea, Meshach Yodai, Hashem pulls back his hand from being esleitzim with the ones who are making the jokes. Kat Chanifim, the group of the flatterers, the Chazal said the pasuk in Iyov, because it will not come in front of him any flattery. So you see again, they're not makalpa b'nei Shechina. Hashem removed himself from the flattery. Kat Shkarim, the group of liars, or it's Shakronim. The Chazal said the pasuk in Tehillim, Doivish Karim, the one who speaks lies, I will not be straight in front of my eyes. Hashem doesn't want to see such a person. And the last one, Kat Masap Lashon Hara, the group of those who say over the evil reports. There's something that says the pasuk in Tehillim, Ki loy el chafetz sha'atu, because you're not a God who wants wickedness. Lo yigud chada, with you will not dwell evil, meaning tzaddik ata Hashem, you're righteous. Lo yigud b'mugud chada, will not dwell in your dwelling place any bad, meaning, and by the Masap Lashon Hara, it says in that parasha, Ki'in befiu nechayna b'goymer, so we see that there's no desire. One last point, Taisus does point out that although we said that whoever flatters his friend has all these terrible things, Taisus says it's only if it's not b'makom sakana. But if it's in a place of danger, then you're allowed to, like he brings the Gemara in the Darim, that Ula was going to Eretz Yisrael and he was with two people, and one got up and he killed his friend. He said to Ula, did I do right? He says yes, and actually pull away the place where you slaughtered him to make it a little bit better. So he came from the Rabbi Yechon and says, maybe I was Maxi de Agar. It says, no, nafshach itzalta, you have to save your life, and therefore then flattery is permitted. Hadlach, Ilan Amar, which I returned to the 7th parak of Masech, the Sotah spoke about those that are said B'chaloshin, B'losh HaKodesh, and we did that because the Sotah was one of those things that we said had to be B'losh HaKodesh, and with that we finish that parak. Thank you to any time, also.